Hello, YouTube. My name is Alan, and it's that time once again. Let's talk metal. We're getting into the holiday season, so the Christmas tree is already up back there in the corner. But today we're not talking about Christmas trees. We are talking about a new book that has recently come out. It is called The Scott Burns Sessions, A Life in Death Metal, 1987 to 1997. This is written by author David Gehlke and was published by Decibel Books. So, a couple of things to note before I get into my review of the book. Marty and I are talking to David and also Scott Burns over on the Heavy Metallurgy live stream. By the time I post this book review, that interview should already have happened. But at the time I'm recording this video, it has not happened yet. So I can't really refer to anything that was said during that live stream event. If you're interested in hearing more from David or Scott himself about the book and what went into it, then by all means, go check out the live stream that Marty and I have recently done from your point in time, but not yet done from my current point in time. That wasn't confusing at all. So let's just move on past that part and get into what's up with the book here. So David had gotten in touch with Scott Burns when he was working on his obituary biography a couple of years ago, and all the pieces fell in place for him to also write, what's, sort of a biography of, Scott's time working in the death metal scene through, of course, Morrisound Studios. Most metal fans, if you're at all familiar with death metal, you're going to know who Scott Burns is. You're going to know his connections to Morrisound and the Tampa, Florida death metal scene in the early and mid-1990s. Don't need to spend a lot of time covering that kind of stuff. So let's look at the book itself. One thing that I noticed right away when I got it and checked the table of contents is that it's not organized by band the way a lot of these books are. It's actually organized by year and just kind of starts, 1987 and lists out each band and album that Scott worked on, either as like an assistant engineer and producer, et cetera, et cetera. So right away, the layout I thought was really neat and interesting because a lot of times books on, death metal and black metal published in recent years, they tend to go more maybe by topic or by one band at a time, and that works okay. But sometimes with that arrangement, it's a little harder to sort out some of the connections because you're reading a chapter on Mayhem and you have all of Mayhem's history laid out, and then 5 chapters later you have a chapter on Darkthrone with all of Darkthrone's history laid out. But you kind of have to keep recalibrating things in your mind, thinking like, okay, so Darkthrone was doing this in 1994, and that means that was the same time Mayhem was doing this thing. There's not a chronological layout that's as intuitive. So when I saw the way this book was organized, I instantly liked it. I was like, okay, that's really cool. That's going to make it very easy to find things because I just have to know the year that something came out in. And it's also going to let you see how things were evolving over time, so that you'll have all the 1987 information together, and you'll have all the 1989 information together, all the 1991 information together, so you can get like a snapshot of the scene as it developed from year to year to year. And because within each chapter it's organized, by album, and the table of contents is very clear on band, album. It also makes it very easy if you do want information just on specific bands. If I just want to see the information about Malevolent Creations albums, okay, the table of contents makes it very easy to say, okay, here's the first snippet on their first album they did with Burns. Then I just, scan the table of contents. I'm like, okay, I've got to skip up to this part of the book, and here's the next entry on Malevolent Creation. So I really, really like the way this is organized. I teach a class on paleontology and Earth history, and it's actually the same way I tend to organize that class. A lot of this is a really geeky aside, but most Earth history paleo classes tend to teach by group of organisms. You do like dinosaur week, then you do pterodactyl week, then you do amphibian week and stuff. I never liked that approach as much because, yes, you have to kind of keep things like, okay, well, if amphibians are doing this 150 million years ago, what were reptiles doing at the same time? it always makes it a little bit harder to see the full picture. So I tend to teach those classes chronologically. It's like, okay, today we're covering the Mesozoic era, and we'll look at all the groups and see what they're all doing at that point in time. And I feel that's the way the book is laid out here. So yeah, it very much connects with me. Really nice layout. Another thing that's interesting about the layout of the book is that there are not a lot of introductory chapters covering, like, the early life of Scott Burns. Usually this kind of book, it starts, in the beginning when Scott, first, tromped off to kindergarten, and you have interviews with, old friends and family members, and they all tell you that, oh, we always knew Scott would be an engineer because I remember him being 6 years old and taking apart, the family's 8-track player to try to figure out how it worked, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I understand why those chapters are included in a lot of books, but let's face it, a lot of times they feel a little unnecessary. I think a lot of people, when they pick up those books, they're kind of like, yeah. Let's just kind of, can we please get to the part that we're interested in? We don't need to know, like, who they took, to high school prom and stuff like that. You kind of want to get into, the main meat of the topic. And that's exactly what this book does. You don't have those introductory things. In the first chapter is 1987. There's a few pages that give a very quick run up on, Scott's out of high school. Here's what he's doing on the scene. Here's him, getting into Morrisound, was almost, basically a glorified intern, but he was an employee, not an intern. And, right away, here's the stuff he started working on in heavy metal terms. So yeah, you're kind of thrown into the mix right away. And again, I think that's a plus. I think folks are going to like that you don't have, 30 or 40 pages of, gradually building up to the point where, and then at the end of chapter 4, Scott's like, Morrisound, I wonder what that is. Maybe I should go check it out. It's not that way at all. Similarly, there's not a lot of outro material at the end of the book. This really says in the title. I mean, it really focuses just 1987 to 1997, the years that Scott was active at Morrisound. There's a little bit of material dedicated to what occurred and what Scott worked on after he officially, left Morrisound. But it doesn't drag on for 50 pages or 100 pages or anything. We're not going through like every single, life change and family development. And again, there's nothing wrong with including that kind of information in such a book. But, this one really does feel like it just wants to focus on, his career at Morrisound. And it fits even better in the case of Scott Burns because, once he left Morrisound, he really did sort of retire from the music scene. He was still involved in a few little things here and there, which are touched on, but he went on to have a very different career after that. And that's not what this book is about. This isn't, the life and times of Scott Burns, computer engineer. It's the life and times of, Scott Burns, death metal engineer. So the book does a really good job from start to finish staying on topic. And I think a lot of readers are going to appreciate that. Now, something about the lineup, or sorry, rather the layout, when I noticed that, again, I liked the way it was organized in terms of years and then just album by album. I was a bit concerned that as I read through all 400 plus pages, then it was going to start to feel very formulaic. That it would just be like, okay, I'm in 1993, I just read the chapter on this band. Now we go to the next section, and it would just kind of feel the same. And next month, Scott talked to fill in the name of the band, and they wanted fill in the name of this gear, and it took fill in the name of how many hours it spent. I was a little worried that it might become a very templated read, and as such that it might become a bit of a slog to get through. That's not really the case at all, though. The entries are very personalized, so that yes, they cover the basics of what was happening each time a band came into the studio and was working, but it's not written in just like a copy and paste type of format. David's a very good author. He's done several books by this point. I've enjoyed all of them that I've read. He's got a very natural writing style that keeps things moving pretty well. And because every few pages you're going to a different band and a different album, it actually helps keep the story moving along. It really doesn't feel like you get bogged down or that you're reading the same entry for the 19th time and it all just starts to blur together. The way David wrote it avoids that problem very, very nicely. All right. And the book includes interviews and conversations with pretty much all the major players from that scene who are still around. Obviously, there are some people who have passed away and could not be interviewed for the book. There are one or two notable absences, people who were reached out to and did not want to participate in the book for whatever reason, and that's always going to happen with a topic like this. But I was actually impressed at how exhaustive the list of interviews was. And it was something Scott and David talked about in the planning of the book, that they really did want to try to contact every single band that Scott had worked with. And I'm sure they admit there's probably someone that slipped through the cracks, and I guess there is. They were very, very thorough, and it seems like almost every band, there's at least somebody, one or two members, who were willing to contribute, and talk to them a bit about it. Same with other people. Monty Connor from Roadrunner Records, David acknowledges he responded to every single email about every single band that David had questions about. So lots of those kind of people, also heavily involved and contributed a lot to the book. Other things noticing about the book is, if there's one thing that does start to feel a little repetitive in the book, it's simply the fact that almost 100% of participants note that Scott, was an incredibly nice, pleasant, and professional person to work with. There are a few exceptions. There are a few detractors here and there. But it's like 99.9% people had nothing but good things to say about Scott's work ethic, his interactions with bands, how helpful he was, and all that stuff. And it's nice to see that from so many different people. It's very easy to, in this day and age especially, people always worry about bias. It's like, well, this person said so and so is nice, but this person says they're a jerk. Who am I supposed to believe? When this many people tell you that, yes, this was a nice person, a very professional person, somebody who had great people skills, you can pretty much take it to the bank at that point. Nobody is going to be universally loved. I'm sure there were a couple of people who went away with a negative experience, but those are rare exceptions in the testimonials given in the book. Overwhelmingly, folks comment on what a great job Scott did and how much they enjoyed working with him. And I think that's especially worth noting because, people amongst fans and critics and reviewers, there are folks that, do not shine a very favorable light on some of Scott's work, that they feel he had, a very standard sound. There's always the typewriter drums thing that some people like to throw around. And so again, if you're only seeing those kind of comments from a few people here and there, you might get a different impression of the guy. But it's really nice to be able to hear, from the people who worked with him directly in the studio. And they were all comments like, no, he gave us the sound we wanted. He made us sound better than we were. We were extremely happy with the product, even if some reviewers or some of the people at labels didn't like it as much. The bands almost always walked away happy with it. Now, Burns didn't always walk away happy with it, and that's something else worth noting. He's very honest in his feedback in the book, it seems. He will quickly point out times where he thinks, I didn't necessarily get the best sound on this one. Or, this particular album, I buried the bass on it. If I had it to do over again, I would have made the bass louder. It just didn't nail that particular one. You get the sense that while he's not necessarily a perfectionist, that he really did strive to make every project sound as good as he could. And he'll quickly and freely admit when he didn't quite get it to the level that he wanted it to. So this doesn't feel like, he's trying to, whitewash his record or only highlight the ones that he feels are perfect. He'll comment, on the good and the bad and the ones in between, and do so pretty honestly too. So that again makes it, a very personable read. Feels like a very honest read. He's also very honest about, when he hit a certain point in his career and started to feel a bit burned out, as a engineer and producer, and was getting kind of burned out on death metal too. And this is something that may hit some readers a little bit strangely. It may rub them slightly the wrong way. Death metal is something that a lot of people are, very loyal to and strongly devoted to. And I can see, some of the really hardcore readers feeling that, it's almost heresy for Scott to say just like, the scene was just a mess by this point. I just didn't give a crap about, stuff. I was kind of sick of it. I'm sure some people are just like, oh, but how could you say that? It was the magical era of Florida death metal. But again, you're getting a good perspective of it from somebody who was on the inside doing a ton of the grunt work, splicing the tape together and spending hours trying to fix individual notes and individual triggers and stuff. That's a very, very different point of view from a fan who just bought a bunch of albums and maybe has rediscovered them years later and is just living the nostalgia trip. Very different from somebody who was on the ground, on the scene at the time, and doing all the little nitpicky stuff that somebody had to do, not just doing the fun party tour the world kind of stuff, but doing the soldering the circuits together to get the board to work again so we can finish this project without going over budget because you have very little money and very little time. Which is another thing I think the book does a good job of highlighting without beating you over the head about, is emphasizing, there were very real restrictions this scene had to work under. These bands did not have huge recording budgets. They did not have tons of time to always work on these projects. Scott by no means got, rich. He may have got famous doing these albums. He didn't get rich. Some of the amounts of money involved on some of these projects is kind of paltry, which I think is another thing that'll surprise a lot of people. Let's face it, when you're just on the fan side of things and you start seeing the same person's name on all these projects or all these pieces of cover art or production jobs or whatever, we kind of automatically assume that they've got, deep, deep Scrooge McDuck kind of pockets by the time all this has happened. Well, how could they not have millions of dollars? They worked for Sepultura and Obituary. There was not a lot of money in death metal at the time. I don't know if there's ever been a lot of money in death metal, but certainly not, during this run in the 1990s. So yeah, that's just, another interesting angle is to really say that, while, it's easy to sit back and criticize, like, why didn't you get, this, bass tone louder? Why didn't you get this, vocal better? Like, well, hey, give us another $150,000 and another 2 months of recording time, and I'm sure he would have. So yeah, the book also touches on other projects Scott tried to work on, attempts to kind of break out of just being a death metal producer, have the issues of being pigeonholed that way, which again, some people are going to think, why would that bother you? You're a god, you're a legend in this scene, everybody loves you to death. But then you get to see it from his point of view. It's just like, yeah, but it wasn't paying the bills, and it was at a certain point driving me crazy because so many bands were wanting very much the same thing, and I knew I could do a lot more different things than that. I didn't want to just do the same thing day in and day out forever. So yeah, it's a very interesting take on those kind of points as well. So yeah, that covers a lot of kind of the main points of the book. So overall, I found a very, very excellent read. It's an easy read, and the way it's divided up, you can just sit down and read an album or two's worth, put it aside, come back later. It's not like you get stuck in the middle of a chapter that goes on for 40 pages and there's no obvious point to take a break or anything. So yeah, a very good read, excellent insights into that death metal scene in Florida at the time, and kind of seeing it from a perspective that we're not used to hearing about it from. We're used to think about it in terms of bands and tours and albums, but not how all those things necessarily got created. And you very much do get that perspective from this book. Now, the last point I'll say here too before we wrap up is Scott's also almost universally pleasant and issuing lots of compliments and praise on almost everybody he talks about in this book. You can tell he's one of those people, he feels like a glass is half full all the time kind of person. He's going to look for the positives, play that up. He's going to, what compliment can I give these people? What nice thing can I say? He's not here to burn people down or give a bunch of hot takes because now it's, 30 years later and why not take a flamethrower at everything? That's not at all what he's here to do. At the same time, he's honest on some things too. And there's at least one person he does dunk on pretty hard in the book. I won't say who. You'll have to read the book yourself if you want to know which person he does just flat out say, nope, this person was an asshole. Fuck them. But it's very, very rare. Again, 99.9% of the folks in here, Scott's comes across, as just, very, grateful and humble. He's like, I liked these guys. I'm glad I got to help them with their projects. I'm glad they let me help them with their projects. So it's, a very nice complementary relationship that he had with these artists and that the artists had with him, which, makes it a really pleasant read as well. There's not a lot of acrimony or insults or, innuendo being thrown around. Very little of that kind of stuff. So yeah, that is my take on Scott Burns' Sessions, A Life in Death Metal, 1987 to 1997. So let's wrap this video up and let's talk metal in the comments down below. If you've read the book, what were your thoughts on it? What were some of your favorite insights, things that you learned that you didn't know about prior to reading the book? Are there certain things that you wish had been expanded upon? Is there, a particular project, maybe a demo recording that didn't make it in, or there was an artist that you really wanted to hear from, and it's one of those few people who weren't available or chose not to participate or, reply to requests for an interview? Leave a comment down below, sharing your thoughts and feelings on the book. There have been several good books coming out on heavy metal lately. I think a couple of them are waiting for me under the Christmas tree over there. So maybe early in 2024, I'll have a couple more book reviews to do for folks if they're interested in some of the other titles that have been coming out in 2023. But that is going to do it for this time. So until next week, everybody take care. And as always, keep banging your head.